There are decisions farmers make quietly, equipment trades handled over the phone, loans signed in back offices, upgrades that nobody talks about until the iron shows up in the field. And then there are decisions that detonate across an entire township. Spring 2022. Central Iowa. A 3,200-acre corn and soybean operation that had run green iron for 23 years walked into a Massey Ferguson dealership and did something that made every farmer within 30 miles stop what they were doing. He traded 4 paid-off John Deere 8R tractors, 8R 340, 8R 310, 2 8R 280s, for 3 brand-new Massey Ferguson 8S models. 8S Point 265, 8S 305, 8S 225. Not a lease. Not a test program. A full fleet conversion. The dealership couldn't believe it. The bank couldn't process it. And the man who ran the grain elevator, who'd watched 2 family farms collapse in the last 10 years, walked into the co-op the morning the news broke and said it out loud in front of 18 farmers drinking coffee at 16 a.m. That man just made a $1.2 million mistake that'll end in auction. This is what happened when one operator decided Massey Ferguson horsepower and efficiency were worth more than 23 years of green loyalty, and what happened when an entire community watched to see if he was brave or just reckless. His name was Derek Hoffmann, 41 years old, 3rd generation on the same section of black dirt 10 miles east of Marshalltown. His grandfather ran International Harvester. His father bought into John Deere in 1987 and never looked back. Derek took over full operation in 1999 with 1,100 acres and a belief that if you ran green iron, maintained it right, and didn't get cute with your cash flow, the ground would take care of you. For 2 decades it did. By 2021, Derek was running 3,200 acres, 1,400 owned, 1,800 rented. His equipment lineup was the kind of thing other farmers noticed. 4 John Deere 8R tractors, a 9870 STS combine he'd kept pristine, Kins planters, Deere sprayer, grain cart, the full kit. Everything was paid off. No equipment loans, no liens, clean balance sheet. He wasn't flashy. He didn't post yield maps on Facebook or talk big at the elevator. But when Derek Hoffmann pulled into the co-op in September, farmers noticed, because his operation looked like what you were supposed to do if you did it right. The 2021 harvest had been strong. Corn pushed 210 bushels per acre on his best ground. Beans hit 62. Prices stayed firm. He banked a profit he hadn't seen since 2012. And that's when Derek started looking at fuel consumption. Not because he was in trouble, because he was paying attention. His 8R 340 was burning 12.7 gallons per hour under load during fall tillage. The 2 8R 280s were pulling just under 11 gallons each. For a 3,200-acre operation running long days, that added up. $4.10 diesel in September 2021 was manageable. But Derek had been farming long enough to know that $4.10 didn't stay $4.10. He started running numbers, hours per tractor, gallons per hour, cost per acre, maintenance schedules, downtime, parts availability. And then he did something most farmers don't do. He walked into the Massey Ferguson dealership in Cedar Rapids just to see what they were offering. He didn't plan to buy. He just wanted data. The dealer showed him the 8S series, 265 horsepower, 305 horsepower, CVT transmission, rated fuel efficiency 15% better than competitive models under equivalent load. Simplified hydraulics, longer service intervals. Derek asked for the maintenance records on 8S models that had been running in Iowa for 2 years. The dealer pulled files, real hours, real service costs, real fuel consumption logs from farms comparable to his. The numbers were legitimate. An 8S.265 running a 12-row planter at 5.2 miles per hour was burning 8.4 gallons per hour. A Deere 8R 280 doing the same work was burning 10.11 gallons per hour. That was a 1.7 gallon difference per hour. Over 400 hours of spring planting, that was 680 gallons. At $4.50 diesel, that was $3,060 saved on one tractor in one season. Derek walked out of the dealership and didn't say a word to anyone. He went home, pulled his own maintenance logs, ran his own fuel records, did the math on 3 Massey Ferguson tractors versus 4 Deere tractors, because the horsepower configuration on the 8S models meant he could consolidate. 3 weeks later, he called the Massey Ferguson dealer and asked for a trade-in appraisal on all 4 8R tractors. The dealer thought he was joking. Derek said, "I'm not joking. I want your best number." The appraisal came back at $1,340,000 trade-in value on the 4 Deere tractors. The 3 Massey Ferguson 8S models, spec'd the way Derek wanted, came to $187,000 after rebates and dealer incentives. That meant Derek could trade 4 paid-off Deere tractors for 3 new Massey Fergusons and walk away with $153,000 in his pocket. No new loan, no debt, and a fuel and maintenance profile that would save him $18,000 to $22,000 per year based on his operational hours. On paper, it was flawless. But this wasn't just paper. This was a 3,200-acre John Deere operation in central Iowa, where half the farmers within 20 miles ran green iron and the other half respected it. Derek told his wife what he was thinking. She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're going to trade Deere tractors we own outright for Massey Fergusons nobody around here runs? I'm going to trade 4 tractors for 3 better ones and pocket $150,000. And when something breaks, then I fix it, same as I do now. Derek, every farmer we know runs Deere. Every mechanic we know works on Deere. You're going to be the guy who bet against the entire township." He didn't argue with her, because she wasn't wrong. But Derek had been farming long enough to know that loyalty didn't pay the diesel bill. And in spring 2022, with fertilizer costs starting to climb and input prices tightening, efficiency wasn't optional anymore. He signed the trade agreement in March 2022. The Deere tractors left his farm on a Tuesday. The Massey Fergusons arrived on a Thursday, and by Friday morning, the entire township knew. The man who ran the grain elevator was named Vic Kulker, 63 years old. He'd managed the co-op for 28 years and had seen farmers make every mistake you could make: over-leverage, bad timing, ego purchases, panic selling. Vic had watched 2 farms go under in the last decade. One in 2014, when corn crashed to $3.30. One in 2019, when a young operator bought equipment he couldn't afford and couldn't sell when hail wiped out 900 acres of beans. Both times Vic saw it coming. Both times he tried to warn them. Both times they didn't listen. So when Vic heard that Derek Hoffmann, a farmer he respected, a farmer with a clean balance sheet, had just traded 4 paid-off John Deere tractors for 3 Massey Fergusons, he didn't see efficiency. He saw risk. That Friday morning, Vic walked into the co-op at 6:10 a.m. 18 farmers were already there, coffee going, grain futures on the TV, spring planting 2 weeks out. Somebody brought it up. "You hear about Hoffmann?" Vic set his coffee down. "I heard. He really traded the whole Deere lineup for Massey Fergusons? That's what I heard." One of the older farmers, ran 1,800 acres, all Deere, 27 years, shook his head. "What the hell's he thinking?" Vic didn't hesitate. "He's not. That man just made a $1.2 million mistake that'll end in auction." The room went quiet. Vic kept going. "You don't trade paid-off iron for brand new iron unless you're chasing something that ain't there. I don't care what the fuel numbers say. When those Massey Fergusons start breaking down and he's waiting 3 weeks for parts nobody stocks, he's going to remember why everyone in this county runs Deere." Another farmer spoke up. "You think he'll make it?" Vic looked at him. "I've seen this before. Farmer thinks he's smarter than the system, thinks he found an edge. Then one thing goes wrong. Market drops, machine breaks, renter pulls ground, and suddenly that edge is a hole he can't climb out of. Derek Hoffmann's got a wife and 2 kids and 3,200 acres that don't care what color his tractors are. He just put all of that on a bet." Someone asked, "You going to talk to him?" "I'm not going to talk to him. I'm going to watch. And when it falls apart, I'll be the one helping him figure out what to sell first." That conversation, word for word, made it back to Derek by noon. Derek heard it from his renter. The guy farming 640 acres of Derek's ground called him that afternoon and said, "You know Vic's telling people you made a $1.2 million mistake, right?" Derek didn't say anything. He said it at the co-op this morning, in front of half the township. Derek thanked him for the call and hung up. He sat in his shop that evening with the 3 Massey Ferguson 8S tractors lined up in front of him. 265 horsepower, 305 horsepower, 225 horsepower, brand new paint, full warranties, CVT transmissions smoother than anything he'd ever run. He didn't regret the trade. But now it wasn't just about efficiency anymore. Now it was public. Vic Kulker had just told 18 farmers that Derek Hoffmann was headed for auction. And in a township where reputation mattered as much as yield, that kind of talk didn't disappear. Derek had two choices. He could walk into the co-op and defend himself, or he could let the tractors do the talking. He chose the tractors. Spring planting started April 18th, 2022. Derek ran the 8S305 on his 16-row planter, the 8S265 on his 12-row, the 8S225 on tillage and spraying. The tractors performed flawlessly. The 8S305 pulled the 16-row planter at 5.4 miles per hour without strain. Fuel consumption averaged 8.9 gallons per hour. His old 8R340 would have burned 11.2 gallons doing the same work. Over 380 hours of planting, that was a difference of 874 gallons. At $4.85 diesel, Derek saved $4,239 in fuel costs on one tractor in a month. The CVT transmission was smoother than anything he'd run. No jerking, no lag, just seamless power delivery from the AGCO power engine. Service intervals were longer. Oil changes at 600 hours instead of 500. Hydraulic filters lasted 1,200 hours. Parts were available through the Cedar Rapids dealer within 48 hours for anything he needed. By the time planting wrapped in mid-May, Derek had logged 1,140 combined hours across all three tractors. 0 breakdowns, 0 downtime, and fuel savings that were tracking exactly where the dealer said they would. But nobody at the co-op asked him how the tractors were running. They just watched. Summer 2022 was hot. Corn grew fast. Beans filled in clean. Derek's operation ran like it always had, quiet, efficient, no drama. But the economics were starting to shift. Diesel hit $5.20 a gallon in June. Fertilizer costs that had been climbing since fall 2021 were now locked in at levels that made every farmer nervous. Anhydrous ammonia that had been $650 a ton in 2020 was now pushing $1,400 a ton. Input costs were compressing margins across the entire Midwest. Farmers who'd been profitable in 2021 were now doing math on whether 2022 would even break even. Derek watched it happen. He saw farmers at the co-op talking quieter, saw equipment that usually got traded sitting on farms another year, saw operators who'd been confident in March start hedging their fall grain just to guarantee some kind of floor. And Derek kept running his Massey Fergusons. By July, his fuel savings were undeniable. He was burning 11% less diesel than he would have with his old Deere lineup. That was $11,400 saved from April through July alone. Maintenance costs were running 18% lower because the service intervals were longer and the parts, when he needed them, were cheaper than Deere OEM equivalents. But Vic Kulker didn't see those numbers. He saw Massey Ferguson red sitting in Derek's field and assumed it was a ticking clock. At the co-op one morning in August, Vic was asked, "How's Hoffmann doing?" Vic poured his coffee and said, "Ask me in October." Harvest 2022 started September 26th. Corn moisture was sitting at 16.5%. Beans were ready. Derek fired up his Deere 9870 STS combine and started cutting. Yields were strong. Corn was pushing 205 bushels per acre on his best ground. Beans were hitting 58 to 61 depending on the field. The crop was clean. The weather held, everything was going right, and the Massey Ferguson tractors kept running. Derek used the 8S305 to pull his grain cart. The 8S265 ran the grain truck shuttle. The 8S225 handled post-harvest tillage as fields opened up. 0 breakdowns, 0 delays. The tractors ran 18-hour days without complaint. By mid-October, Derek had corn in the bin and beans sold forward at $14.20 a bushel, a price that locked in a profit even with elevated input costs. He'd survived the year, and the Massey Fergusons had delivered exactly what the dealer promised. But the real test wasn't 2022. The real test was what came next. November 2022. Corn prices started falling. $6.40 a bushel in September dropped to $5.85 in November. By December, it was $5.50. Farmers who'd been counting on 6+ corn to cover their inflated input costs were suddenly doing new math, and it got worse. Spring 2023, Fertilizer prices stayed high, diesel stayed high, but corn futures kept falling. By March 2023, new crop December corn was trading at 5 cents a bushel. Beans were at $13.20. The margins that had been tight in 2022 were now razor thin in 2023. Farmers across Iowa started making hard decisions. Equipment purchases got delayed. Ground got returned to landlords. Operations that had been expanding started contracting. Vic Kulker watched it happen in real time. He saw farmers at the co-op who'd been confident a year ago now asking about forward contracts and price floors. He saw debt loads that had been manageable in 2021 become suffocating in 2023. And he kept waiting for Derek Hoffmann to crack. But Derek didn't crack. Because while input costs were crushing farms across the township, Derek's cost per acre was lower than it had been in 3 years. His fuel consumption on the Massey Ferguson tractors was saving him $19,000 a year compared to his old Deere lineup. His maintenance costs were down $7,200 a year. And because he'd consolidated 4 tractors into 3, his insurance, storage, and ancillary costs had dropped another $4,100 annually. That was $30,300 a year in operational savings. On a 3,200-acre operation facing $5.10 corn, that wasn't just an edge, that was survival. Spring planting 2023. Derek's Massey Ferguson 8S tractors went back into the field, same performance, same fuel efficiency, same reliability. And this time, farmers started noticing. It was small at first. A farmer at the co-op in April asked Derek, "How are those Massey Fergusons holding up?" Derek said, "No complaints. You save any fuel like they said you would?" About 11% compared to what I was burning before. The farmer nodded, didn't say anything else, but he didn't walk away either. 2 weeks later, another farmer asked, "You had any trouble getting parts?" Cedar Rapids dealers had everything I've needed within 2 days. Everything? Everything. By June 2023, the questions weren't skeptical anymore. They were genuine. Because farmers across the township were running the same math Derek had run 18 months earlier, and they were realizing that in a compressed margin environment, fuel efficiency and maintenance costs weren't optional. Vic Kulker heard the conversations. He saw farmers asking Derek about his tractors. He saw operators who'd laughed at the trade in 2022 now quietly checking Massey Ferguson inventory at the Cedar Rapids dealer. And Vic hated it, because if Derek Hoffmann survived, if those Massey Fergusons kept performing, it meant Vic had been wrong. Publicly wrong. In front of 18 farmers who'd heard him call it a $1.2 million mistake. But Vic still believed the collapse was coming. He just didn't know when. Fall 2023. Harvest yields were decent but not exceptional. Corn averaged 198 bushels per acre, beans hit 56, prices stayed low. December corn settled at $4.75 a bushel. January beans at $12.80. Those were survival prices, not profit prices. Across central Iowa, farms started breaking. A 2,400-acre operation north of Marshalltown went into auction in October. A 1,900-acre farm east of Toledo returned 600 acres to landlords and sold 2 tractors just to stay current on operating loans. The consolidation Vic had predicted was happening, but it wasn't happening to Derek Hoffmann. Derek's cost per acre in 2023 was $487. That included seed, fertilizer, chemicals, fuel, maintenance, land rent, insurance, and labor. His break-even price on corn was $4.32 a bushel. On beans, $11.10. He wasn't making big money, but he was making money. And in 2023, that was enough. The Massey Ferguson tractors had now run 2 full growing seasons, 4,800 combined hours, 0 major breakdowns, 2 minor hydraulic hose replacements, 1 software update, fuel savings tracking at 11.4% compared to his old Deere lineup. Derek had banked $60,600 in operational savings over 2 years just by switching to Massey Ferguson. That was $60,600 he could put toward land rent, input costs, or cash reserves, money that farmers running less efficient iron didn't have. And the township was starting to notice. Spring 2024. The breaking point. Corn futures opened the year at $4.40 a bushel, beans at 12.10 cents. Fertilizer prices finally started dropping, but diesel stayed elevated at 4.60 cents a gallon. Margins were still compressed. Survival was still the goal. And that's when the conversation at the co-op finally shifted. A farmer walked up to Derek in March 2024 and asked, "You still running those Massey Fergusons?" "Yeah." "How much are you really saving?" Derek didn't sugarcoat it. "Fuel's down about 11%. Maintenance is down about 15%. I'm saving around $30,000 a year compared to what I was running before." The farmer stared at him. $30,000? Give or take, on 3,200 acres? On 3,200 acres. The farmer nodded slowly. "That's the difference between profit and breaking even this year." "Yeah," Derek said. "It is." The farmer walked away. But 3 days later, he was at the Massey Ferguson dealer in Cedar Rapids, asking about trade-in values on his Deere 8R lineup. Vic Kulker heard about it, and for the first time since March 2022, Vic realized he'd been wrong. Not wrong about the risk, wrong about the outcome. Derek Hoffmann hadn't made a $1.2 million mistake. He'd made a $1.2 million decision that saved his operation $30,000 a year in a margin environment that was killing farms across Iowa. And now other farmers were following him. By summer 2024, 3 more farms in the township had traded into Massey Ferguson 8S tractors. Not because they were chasing a trend, because they were chasing survival. Derek didn't gloat. He didn't post about it. He didn't walk into the co-op and say, "I told you so." He just kept farming. But one morning in July 2024, 2 years and 4 months after Derek made the trade, Vic Kulker was standing at the co-op counter when Derek walked in to pick up a parts order. Vic looked at him. Derek looked back, and Vic said, "You made the right call." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just 5 words. Derek nodded. "Appreciate that, Vic." Vic turned back to his coffee, and Derek walked out. The conversation lasted 11 seconds, but it meant more than 2 years of arguments ever could have. Because Vic Kulker, who'd called Derek's trade financial suicide in front of 18 farmers, had just admitted he was wrong. And in a township where reputation mattered as much as yield, that was as close to vindication as a farmer ever gets. Derek Hoffmann still farms 3,200 acres in central Iowa. He still runs 3 Massey Ferguson 8S tractors. They've logged over 7,200 combined hours now. 0 major failures. Fuel efficiency still tracking at 11% better than competitive models. He's banked over $120,000 in operational savings since the trade. 4 other farms in his township have switched to Massey Ferguson iron in the last 2 years, not because Derek told them to, because the math told them to. Vic Kulker still manages the grain elevator. He still drinks coffee at the co-op every morning at 6:10 a.m., and he still watches farmers make decisions he doesn't always agree with. But he doesn't call them mistakes anymore. Not out loud. Because he learned what every farmer eventually learns, that sometimes the boldest decision isn't the reckless one. Sometimes it's the one that saves you when everyone else is drowning. Derek Hoffmann traded 4 paid-off John Deere tractors for 3 Massey Ferguson 8S models in spring 2022. The elevator manager called it financial suicide. 2 years later, Derek was still farming, and Vic Kulker finally stopped talking.